All right, we are recording. Hey, welcome back, everyone. We have a big room today, a room full of experts. We'll go around and do some introductions, and I think we have a really neat presentation and discussion today. So, Tom, you want to take it away and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tom Harris. I'm a professor in economics, also a state extension specialist in cooperative extension and director of the University Center for Economic Development. Go ahead, Bob.
All right, Fred.
Fred Steinmann, assistant research professor with the College of Business at the University of Nevada, Reno, and working alongside Tom at the University Center for Economic Development.
All right, thank you, Fred. And Mehmet?
Hi, my name is Mehmet Tosun, professor of economics. I'm the director of international business programs in the College of Business at UNR. I'm also the Barbara Smith Campbell distinguished professor of Nevada tax policy.
Fantastic. And lastly, Roger, you're our guest today, so you want to take it away?
Yeah, so my name is Roger Coupal. I'm a professor at the Ag and Applied Economics Department at the University of Wyoming. And like Tom, I'm a community development specialist that works on community development issues around the state, obviously in Wyoming, but also in some of the surrounding states.
Great. So, Tom, do you want to facilitate the question?
Okay.
Or we just open it up?
Oh, I'll start it off. This with COVID-19 and a lot of things been happening in the economies in the state. There's been a lot of people talking about resiliency. What does it mean? This is what we're going to address a little bit. Both Roger and I have extension appointments, and in the West, in the land grant systems, there is a thing. There's 4 regional centers that kind of work on regional areas. There's one in the South, one in the North Central, one in the Northeast, and one in the West. And so Roger and I have been working with the Western Rural Development Center, and we developed a little thing talking about resiliency and the economic impact potential, what's going on with the COVID-19. And it made me think that this might be a nice little, I think you call these podcasts or video casts, to kind of discuss this so we can get this out to the public to start talking about these different areas. So we're going to be breaking it up in thirds. So I'm going to talk a little bit of what's going on in the state of Nevada with the latest data. Then I'm going to turn it over to Roger to talk about resiliency and some of the things. And he's got a good example in Wyoming, which, Wyoming's a resource base like us, very applicable in areas. And then we have questions from Mehmet and Fred to ask us some other things to discuss in this area. So I will get on my screensaver and get this going. Oh, do you have to give me permission, I think? Okay. Oh, good. Okay. I'm going to start talking a little bit. This is a little bit about what is resiliency, and this is going to be the main focus. But what I thought I'd take a little time just talking about what's been going on in the state of Nevada, especially since April. One of the things I always like to talk about is this little note. Peggy Noonan was a speechwriter for George Bush I, and there was something she wrote I thought was very good. Everybody says we're in the same boat, but he says we're not in all the same boat. We're all in the same storm. What we mean by different boats in that area is that different size economies, different sectors are having different impacts in what's going on, and so really it's not an equally sized boat for everybody. This storm is very much. And Mark Cuban, who you can guess I grew up in Texas, who owns the Dallas Mavericks, made some interesting comments one time. He was talking about how the economy, the recovery could be brutal, and that I think this is something we're going to notice, that all of a sudden you see an onrush, but there's some other things that we need to be addressing. Fred's with me on writing a project for EDA to kind of help businesses cope with coming out of COVID-19 and all the different regulations that come out. So it's going to be a different economy coming, and we need to help to address this. Now, the latest, I hope these things come out here, the latest is some of the labor market information we got from the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, and kind of shows April. We went through, March had a few numbers, but April really had the numbers kind of showed some impact. From March 20 from March 2020 to April 2020, excuse me, Nevada lost 244,800 jobs. It's a lot of jobs. If you think of the city of Boise, Boise, Idaho has a population of 229,000 people. So we've lost more than the city of Boise in 1 month. And that's quite a change that goes on there. From April 2019 to April 2020, Nevada's lost almost a little over 250,000 jobs. So the employment impacts have been very noticeable. And when people look at this, be sure to think, we'll talk about this later, maybe in another podcast, a different of a place of work data and place of residence data. Place of work data is where people get where they work. This labor market's called labor louse, or I want a better word, is residence, where people reside, and from that they figure out where people are unemployed because they get the number employed and how many are unemployed. So these are where the unemployment numbers come from. And then also the city of Reno has lost about 28,000 jobs, and the other SMSA is Carson City, about 4,000. So as you can see, there's been some pretty significant decreases going on in the state, in which has gotten some of us worried. The labor market, I hope this kind of comes in. This is the labor market unemployment rates, and in 2020, April 2020, we had an estimated unemployment rate of 28.2%. Second in this area, if we look at the state, if it had in the nation, I don't have this right at the moment, Michigan was second with 22.7%. Connecticut has the lowest unemployment rate of 7%. So you can see it's a lot of different percentage impacts, and it has to do with the nature of your economy. If you had a lot of services or employment where you're working with people face to face, there's a lot of unemployment that has occurred. Now, here's something I always, this COVID thing is so dramatic, is that in the history, Nevada, the highest unemployment rate is the latest one. It happened in April 2020 at 28.2%. The lowest ever unemployment rate for the state of Nevada was February 2020 at 3.6%. So in 2 months, we've gone from the lowest to the highest. Quite a structural change. And as you see here, there's different impacts, especially, like Clark County has about 33.5% increase, 33.5% unemployment rate in metros. And you get some places like Eureka, only 6.5, that's mainly in mining. Everything has gone up a little bit, but you can see sometimes in the rural areas, those are with the mining hasn't decreased that much because of the nature of their sectors. It's not a lot of person to person where you shut down. Mining and other things are kept going on. And as you see here, the city of Las Vegas has about 32% unemployment rate, and it goes on that you can see it's been some big impacts in our economy. So the other thing is Nevada gaming data. A lot of our money is from gaming, and to April 2020 from 2019, there's been a 99.6% decrease. And so the fiscal year, Nevada gaming revenues have decreased by 11.4%. So as we know, this is going to have an impact on our economy, has an impact on our fiscal state. All of us here working at UNR, or the Nevada System of Higher Education, as well as Roger works at Wyoming, we're noticing that the state's funds are being impacted by the COVID and what has happened with the decrease in employment. And so this is what made me want to have this kind of a talk a little bit just about resiliency so people can have some idea about what it is. This is the paper that we wrote that's with the Western Rural Development Center. And there's a series of COVID-19. I think there's a couple more that Roger and I are working with. Don Albrick leads the Western Rural Development Center, and Marion Bentley also is there at Utah State, in which we discuss these things. So what I'm going to do is next I'm going to have Roger. Let me get off the podcast here, Roger, and put your system on. And let me see here. Let me get Roger's. I got Roger's here. Okay, Roger. Wait a minute. Okay. Roger, you'd like to start, go right ahead. think you're on mute, Roger.
There, thank you. So a lot of us are looking at trying to figure out how economies start and stop, and there's been some work on that, but we have to always remember that this is not just a recession; it's a pandemic-generated recession, and so there are a lot of things going on that we have to think about. So if you go to the next slide. Just sort of, I'm sure you guys had the same things, restaurants, food courts, cafe closures, that kind of thing, public accommodation, that kind of thing, bars, taverns, microbreweries, and all that stuff. It's kind of weird in Wyoming. They have cigar bars. I don't think I've ever been to one, but there are apparently some. Gymnasiums, movie and theaters and opera houses. And so all these things got closed. Now they're just starting to come back. And Fremont County is located right in the center of the state. So they asked me to talk about kickstarting the economy. And so I was thinking about how this works. There's been some work on the recovery from the what we used to call anyway the Great Recession, so that helps give us some kind of insight, but it's not a perfect match, so we have to be careful about that. So, but how do economies recover? Rural economies, and how do they? And how do you manage that recovery? And resilience is all about managing a recovery. So I started looking at this, and and we start with there's a paper by Ron Martin, a British economist that I got a lot about from this stuff from, so he brought out the plucking model. Now, Milton Friedman started this in '93. Is you have a long-term growth rate, there's a recession, and as you go along time, then it comes back to that long-term growth rate. Now, Friedman was talking mostly about a national economy where there's a lot of depth. So if an economy comes in or an industry or a recession comes in and an industry negatively affects a certain subset it was affected by a certain by a recession, then other parts of the recession might not other parts of the economy might not be is affected by that. And in the last recovery or recession we had for Wyoming, that was the case. We had, massive drops in the energy economy, which is the prime economic base, but the national parks were open. So we got 4.1 million people that go to Yellowstone National Park and 3.3 million that go to Grand Teton, for example. Well, we have 538,000 people in the state, and that's a lot of people coming in, regardless of the recession. So it is an important issue. What Martin was talking about, though, was that it doesn't necessarily fit. The plucking model doesn't necessarily fit what goes on in states and rural economies. In fact, I heard this on multiple cases at multiple times, and I think you probably have heard it, that we're waiting for the economy to snap back. Okay, and so that plucking model is what's snapping back. It's like plucking a rubber band or a guitar string or something, right? What Martin argues is that there may be different ways of responding. Okay, so one possibility is that number A there, okay, where you return to a long-run growth rate, but at a lower level because there's permanent changes in the economy. So let's say, for example, in our state, in Wyoming, even if the economy comes back and we figure out how to manage COVID-19, okay, we still have the long-term decline of some of our components of our energy industry. That doesn't go away. It's still there, and so we're still down, being impacted by that at a lower rate. We may be growing at the same rate, but at a lower rate or lower level. Another possibility, though, and this is what everybody's worried about, is long-run decline. Okay, and so if you lose enough of an economy in terms of the public goods that are generated, the public services like the schools, the post office, even those kinds of things, or let's say a permanent shutdown of several major industries, there could be long-run declines, and the West has seen that in areas all over all over the United States, but especially in the West. As a matter of fact, there is a little town called Jeffrey City that was a booming place during the uranium boom in the 1970s, and now it's actually bought out by another company, a real estate company, because there is no more uranium from the area. Though that could change, but not likely. So and they lost their school, and so when you lose a school, you tend to be that's when things really start declining. So what Martin was arguing is that from a resilience perspective, that recovery has to look at a lot of issues that might be occurring at a small area, at a small region, so county level, at the state level, even. For example, some of the work that we put in our paper, one of them looked at one set of authors looked at out of Idaho, looked at measure resilience by, okay, you look at the peak and then here's the recession and how long did it take you get back to the recession. And so that difference is how you actually measure resilience. And what he found out was that if you have a small population and heavily ag dependent, you tend to snap back quicker than if you have a manufacturing. Another study by Hahn and Getz out of Penn State University looked at the nation and the regions and argued that their resilience in terms of how you actually get back to your before the recession started was took about anywhere from 14 to what did he say, after 6 months or 14 months, you may have gotten 3 to 3.5% nationally on terms of the employment that you lost. Okay, so that in most rural areas across the country, urban areas, both sets of papers actually looked at that, so they tended to snap back relatively quickly. So the next slide, Tom. So here's again, Fremont County. So if you look at that, in 2001, you have a growth, a slow growth, but a growth because of the economic boom or the oil and gas boom that was occurring there. And then about 2009, gas went down, and then kind of picked up again because of tourism, and then it's been declining ever since because of the different things. So this is pre COVID-19, but the expectation is that if they don't do anything, okay, that it will continue to decline even if we do dig ourselves out of the coronavirus, the pandemic. And so that's a problem. If you look at the next slide, okay, on one hand, we'd like to see the green line, okay, but in reality, that was driven a lot by the assumptions within the boom itself. And so what we have is the blue line, the declining line in the county, and so they're really concerned about what's going to drive their economy. They, like a lot of those counties in that rural area, are also dependent upon tourism to Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park, and they have been closed, but supposedly they're going to open up. but they're also dependent upon oil. If you go to the next one. Yeah, there we go. Okay, this is the futures West Texas Intermediate, which is pretty valuable oil normally. And it actually was the first time in history we've seen actually futures prices at a minus $40 and $50 a barrel. We still have in Wyoming minus 58 for some of the heavy oils, right? And so what we're looking at there is a collapse of a traditional economic base. And so we can't, that's not going to snap back. We just don't think that's going to happen. And so that poses problems not only for the counties in terms of their public finance, but also for the state itself. Next. Now, what thankfully, what Martin did do is to talk about what it takes to avoid some of those. And I call it, he didn't call it this, the sort of a rural reformation trend, you know, where, okay, yeah, you know, we might go back to the long-term average growth, or we might actually go higher than that, you know. How do you do that? So that you have the disaster or national crisis and drops it, but then it tends to grow back quicker, and it gives the opportunity, it gives the local economy the opportunity to think about other issues. Now, you know, we've always heard this, you know, never waste a crisis or a recession. Tom and I have talked about this, but you know, my concern is that we probably, in Wyoming anyway, we may not waste a recession, but we probably wasted our boom and not thinking about how to diversify that way. So now's the time to start thinking about how to sort of rebuild that economy in terms of for new things. If the economy comes back, in the case of Nevada, I don't doubt for a second that eventually the casinos are going to open up, and you're going to have probably more tourists than you like, you know. And same thing with the national parks. Next slide. Yeah. Oop. There we go. Okay. Let's go. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, you know, essentially, is we have to think in terms of transitioning from one set of economic basis to another. And this is what I was trying to tell the people in Fremont County. You know, re-leverage resources. You know. Okay, you got water. Is there a way to sort of leverage that to build new types of industries there? I don't think they were particularly enthused about this idea, but I just threw out ideas that said, okay, well, what about this? Here's what we have, you know. Another one that's come up multiple times for us, again, this is not Nevada, is a reclamation industry cluster. You know, if the coal mines are going to start slowing down and coal companies are going bankrupt, then somebody's going to have to clean those places up. And so some economic developers and I have been talking about this over the years. Okay, an example of that is the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington, they turned. Now they have a lot of problems still, so don't assume that they're out of the woods, but there are international companies now in that Hanford area that have figured out how to clean up nuclear contamination that nobody's has in the past, and are selling their services worldwide. So, you know, so trying to figure out these kinds of issues is about leveraging resources. Next slide. Finally, you know, what you've got to do, I think, and what we're trying to get communities to do here is you know, building resources for pivoting to new economic bases, you know, and entrepreneur engagement. There are ideas out there, you know, and you have to sort of you know, coax the potential entrepreneurs to actually talk about them, but they are there. Workshops and communication strategies, business retention expansion programs. You know, in our case, we've got economic development and the state economic development. which is the Business Council and University Extension and others. And so the Western World Development Center has a lot of these to new things. And I think that's what I wanted to end with was that, you know, it's time. It is time. You know, never waste a good recession or disaster. But on the other hand, everything is cyclical, and figuring out ways during good times to protect the bad during the bad times is something we're going to have to do. In the pandemic or the epidemic side of things, this is what the fourth epidemic we've had in 20 years, which we're probably going to have more, you know. So it may not hit us, it may hit us and not you guys, but nonetheless, you know, that's where we're at. So we all have our work cut out for us. That's it.
That's some very interesting information. Any questions?
I think what we're going to do is start off. Mehmet, I don't think I need to bring your questions up. If you just ask them, Mehmet has some questions, sure. And I think this gets started for both Roger and myself. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tom and Roger, for your presentations. This is very interesting topic, of course, and Tom and I have been they've been talking about this a little bit. We started sort of pondering about this, question about resilience regarding Nevada. So I thought that maybe I'll ask one question to Roger and one question to Tom. And I actually want to start with Roger. Roger, in your presentation, I think you already addressed my first question about okay, so what is resilience? Like, what do we call this thing called resilience? But maybe a related question that would be good is rural versus urban resilience. So we will think that the COVID-19 will be impacting, of course, like everybody in all areas, right? So no doubt. But would the rural areas be impacted, very different from the urban areas? I guess that's one question. And maybe related to that, can we say something about, maybe based on the previous recession, the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, whether we can say here's a success story about a rural area, let's say within a state, that let's say did much better in terms of resilience compared to an urban area in the same state or close by. So that's one. And my question to Tom is, I was thinking about north-south differences, right, in Nevada. And you actually pointed out, very nicely that the unemployment rate, if you look at these indicators such as the recent unemployment numbers, there's a big difference, right? So it is safe to say that the economy we see in the north is a little different from the south. So given that, can you say something about moving forward, like in the future, whether the resilience will be better or stronger in the north versus south? So what do you think? So, those are my two big questions to start with.
Roger, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So Ringwood and Watson and Lewin did a study. Now, a lot of this depends on how you measure resilience too, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But and what they found was that these small rural counties that are heavily ag dependent actually had a higher measurable resilience than manufacturing counties. That said, and then I think Han and Stefan Getz's work was a little broader than that, but did a different way of measuring recovery rates at times, as opposed to a formal resilience model. But in their case, both of them argued that the recovery of urban areas is quicker and higher than recovery in those rural areas. And yet the resilience is itself, depends on how you measure it again, is higher in those small agricultural dependent communities. And the reason why I'm hesitant about this is something that Tom and I and Marianne and Don have been talking about a little bit, is that there's no research on this yet, is that maybe the question isn't resilience, but how the more resilience, but how much resilience do you want? Because there could be a trade-off between resilience and opportunity. I remember this when I was working extension in Idaho years ago. We were in this county, Idaho County. It's the largest county in the state, and it's all rural. It's a very rural county. And the county commissioner came up to the group of us that were talking and giving presentations, and she said, "You know, I understand why my kids just got jobs in Spokane, Washington, which is about 3-4 hours away. And I understand why that's the case, and that's where the opportunities are. But what I'd like to have seen is, how do you create opportunities for them to stay in Idaho County?" And it's always stuck with me ever since. And it occurred to me that what Ringwood, Watson, and Lewin are doing is whether or not is whether or not they've got too much resilience. What they showed was that, and I think Hannon gets to the same thing, was that those urban areas, metro areas, are not really real relative to some of these urban areas, are not real resilient, but their recovery rates are quicker, and they're just simply there's more activity, which one would expect, I think. So it's something that we need to think about more, is that how much resilience do we want, and is there, okay, that's an open question, is there an opportunity and resilience trade-off? So, but in general, those urban areas snap back, to use the Milton Friedman term, quicker, and maybe not quite to where the economy was, or maybe sometimes even higher, depending upon the area, than rural areas. But for the most part, the resilience levels as measured tend to be higher in these small rural economies.
Good point. I add a little bit to what Roger was saying. Basically, the north-south was very interesting. I always think it's very interesting in the state of Nevada, our linkages, and this is something Fred has always pointed out to me, is that it's an east-west linkage with economics, where Reno is linked to San Francisco, Las Vegas is linked to Southern California. We're linked north-south by fiscal, FISCAL, because of the gaming revenues, but it's kind of interesting how we're linked and how it gives a difference. It was interesting. I think you have to look at the economic base and what's impacted. In the last Great Recession, it was really a financial impact. And if you went to city of Reno, I always remember I talked to this person that owned some apartments. He had a lot of vacancies in apartments, but then in Elko, which was gold mining, which was going strong, he had people waiting in lines. And so sometimes it's what are the sectors are impacted. Now, in this COVID, what we have is this almost kind of like Bob Potts sometimes calls it administrative closure. What we have is we close a lot of businesses if they had face-to-face contact. And of course, casinos have that. And Nevada was famous because in the early times, we were the monopoly. In 1980s, everything opened up, and so different things occurred. And of course, we got here in the north got impacted more than Vegas, in that Vegas is an international market. When the casinos opened up in California, it took some of our way. So in a way, the north became less resilient than the south. And I always thought that one of the things is that because of that, and we were in the dire straits, we did have that Tahoe Reno industrial complex. We were more to take a chance, so we brought in Tesla and these other things, and so we brought in these other high tech industries and diversified our economy. And I also think that we're going to find it in some of our areas, even our rural areas, that the electric cars and mainly batteries. I always think the batteries to me is the big thing, because everybody's looking at moving to green energy. Well, the only thing bad about green energy is that with solar you got nighttime, and with wind you got calm winds versus bad winds, and with hydropower you got drought. So what do you do when something happens? Well, you better have a battery. And so these batteries are going to be something that's going to be I think a very essential to this new power. Plus, in Humboldt County we're developing a mine that has potential of getting lithium, so we could have a linkage, a far and backward cluster there. A whole new industry has started to develop here. The South had tried to do that. I know with one of the electric car it didn't make it, but Vegas is still growing. I mean, sometimes we look at Vegas, is kind of shown to me by somebody in Clark County. They grow about 30,000 a year, which is about the city of Carson City, the size of Carson City every year. So the casinos are impacted, but the things are opening. The problem is, to me, is how the business model has changed. And in the casino industry, how many people can come in, what kind of costs are coming in there. The North, I think, is because of we became less resilient with gaming. We've been expanding, going in different directions. Vegas has still, and they're expanding a little bit more now. I think this may encourage them to bring in new industries also. So that's what's been going on, the difference in the North and the South. And when all this resiliency stuff, I think is based on, you do the location quotients and shift share, what kind of base do you have? And is that base impacted? I look at Connecticut only has 7.9% unemployment. Well, they're mainly finance. Finance of computers. People aren't being impacted. Here, we got impacted a whole lot because of service. The service sector really took a cut with this COVID-19. So that's why I say the difference. Anything else, Mehmet or Fred, whatever?
Well, I have a couple other questions, but do you want me to ask now as well, or?
Let's have Fred. Fred, you got a couple questions or something?
Maybe Fred first.
Maybe to a certain degree, your sense of, how do we encourage resiliency and recovery in economic downturns like this, especially one led by a pandemic, across the way, what do you feel is the relationship between a local government's ability to provide critical infrastructure, more community development oriented assets, and the ability of that local base economy in a rural community to recover? While you think of that question, to give you a little context, in Nevada, if you look at property tax receipts for every single local government in the state of Nevada, every municipality, every county, every school district, regardless of whether or not they're in a metro area or a non-metro area, they never recovered to pre-Great Recession levels. So every single county, every single school district, every single city in the state of Nevada had, in the last fiscal year, took in less property tax receipts than they took in the fiscal year prior to the Great Recession. So if local governments haven't even gotten back to, a fiscal par from the Great Recession, what can local governments do to provide the critical infrastructure necessary to support recovery and growth moving forward?
You want to answer that? I got some. Well, let me do that real quick and let Roger come in. Fred, that's something we've discussed. What happens, sometimes policies are made and people think what's going on in an economy will continue forever. I found that. There was a limit on a 3% increase in values that was on property tax. That was put on when everybody's property before the Great Recession. You remember properties were going up, 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 up. And of course, people were paying. And that, as a response to that, the legislature put in this 3% growth. And when it bottomed, it fell. They didn't put a bottom 3%. When it bottomed. And now they're going back up, but they only can go up 3%. Population doesn't do that. The economy expanded doesn't do that. And so what happens, you really have limited the ability of government to adequately fund, government. Government is a fellow at Georgia named Dave Craybill who did a study, and with his model, he included the efficiencies you get with federal or government spending vis-a-vis. Out here, we got I-80. With I-80, retailers do not have to have large inventories. In fact, we invented an industry called just-in-time inventory because of that, and then one of the biggest industries ever called Walmart because of that. And so government has a very big, they add efficiency. Now, yes, you got to watch out. I mean, too much goose up the pudding, but it will very much get into that. And this is something we've always talked about, the infrastructure. I think people are talking about how we need to develop infrastructure, education of people. In Ely, I know Fred's been in Ely a lot, like I have, and one of the most enlightening things I ever had was from the Ely mayor who asked me, talking about broadband, and very limited. And she said, yes, we can't keep young people in here because they can't game. Well, I was thinking about the Hotel Nevada, you play 21. She goes, no, Tom, they can't download their Netflix. Gaming, broadband's become a quality of life. I mean, I'm too old to understand that. You need that for people to come in to do business and for people to stay there. So there's very much government infrastructure that aids, and just look at interstates, what they have done. Interstates have changed the economy and all that. And I do believe that would add to because if you want to diversify into something that required broadband, forget it. You got to have, you talk about people, we need labor. You also need infrastructure like highways and internet and other things to come in there, good water and all that, sewers and all that for economic development. If you have that, then you can proceed. But I don't know, that's my take on it. Roger, you got anything you'd like to add?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think identifying and leveraging those are in a sense, inventorying those resources, those public infrastructure resources you do have, where are they wanting, where are they not, is the first step. You have to, most economies have those kinds of issues, those kinds of things. It's just trying to figure out if there's a way to leverage it to a new use. I'm in the process of working with a group of people. I got a grad student working on creating activated carbon out of coal, right? It's called coal char. It's actually cheaper than biochar, and it can be used if it's highly refined for microelectronics, or it can be used actually for to enhance agricultural operations because of the properties of the stuff that, at a lower level of development. Now, will that change or save the coal industry? Well, who knows? Probably not. But point is that they're thinking about that kind of stuff, and I think it's important to try to do that. But you bring up a good point in the sense that of the public finance limitations, because this is a discussion that I actually had with in Fremont County. It was because the county commissioners and the mayors and city council were in there, and so they're saying, well, yeah, but our these longtime businesses could close down permanently, and they're an important part of the tax base, and et cetera. And so I actually had a conversation with the chief of staff of our governor. I mean, one nice thing about living in a state with a small population is that you actually run into these people. You have to be careful, talk bad about them, I guess. But And these are good guys. I mean, I shouldn't say shouldn't apply anything like that. But and they're actually thinking of, okay, is there a way to let counties and communities borrow in the short run out of our permanent mineral trust fund, for example? Last I heard, that idea never went anywhere. But one of the things that sitting in small communities like this, that if Congress, I think Tom, you were saying this, right? That if this Congress doesn't pass legislation to protect those public services that communities require, then economic development probably won't happen. And so economic development at the local level needs to consider those resources, and then if the state can't do it, hopefully the feds will come in. But you have to have those public services, otherwise people are not going to go there. So it is a real risk.
I remember some words of wisdom from my very first boss in the public sector when I worked for the City of Reno's redevelopment agency. The ability to write a check is everything, and we can pray and come up with great economic development strategies and recovery plans and resiliency plans, but ultimately, if you can't fund it, none of it will become real.
Yeah. True. And like Roger's saying, we may have to pivot, figure out new ways to finance everything. We do have a unique thing in the West. We have a lot of public lands which impact the finances and all that. So, but anyway.
Although I think, and again, maybe something for you to think about, I think that the Western states in particular, states like Wyoming and Nevada, maybe New Mexico and Utah, with relatively small populations compared to their eastern counterparts or coastal counterparts, the fiscal systems in the West are, I think, particularly vulnerable, to this type of pandemic and economic collapse. I mean, if you look at the budget for the state of Nevada for fiscal year 2020, 2021, say that 5 times fast, state sales and use tax accounts for 30% of all anticipated revenues collected by the state. Well, you've just put in a policy that says every retailer with face-to-face contact has to reduce capacity by 50%. You're talking about a potential up to 50% reduction in 30% of the state's budget. And number 2 on that list is gaming percentage fees, which accounts for 18% of the state's general fund revenue. And guess what's been closed for the last 3 months? Every single gaming establishment in the state of Nevada. So I think, and again, maybe for you to comment on is, in Nevada, Wyoming, and other states where the tax base is so limited because the economic base is so limited, if you have a economic calamity like COVID-19 that specifically targets those elements of the fiscal system, the road to recovery is not a year away. It's not 5 years away. It may not even be a decade away. You may never get back to par because of the lost capacity, from one year to the next, and the failure to be able to generate enough revenues to actually invest in things that'll stimulate economic growth.
Well, good point for what Roger and Mehmet are. I'm part of a WRDC. We're looking at the COVID impacts on fiscal, and you usually have a three-legged stool: income tax, sales tax, and property tax. In the West, everybody has 2 legs, and that's why we're flipping around. If you go, and I think Mehmet has some new data. I think we did a podcast on that too, showing that if you go to New Mexico, they're all in petroleum. Guess what? 67. What's happening? You go to Alaska, petroleum, and if you go to Wyoming, you got coal, and we got gaming, and so we're not diversified in our revenues. I don't know, Mehmet, you may.
Yeah, so we did a complete separate podcast last time. And actually, I'll say that our reliance on sales and related excise type taxes is even more than what the general revenue fund shows, like that 30%. It is with the census data, as you'll remember, that you actually go over 50% if you're talking about just the state tax revenues. But the issue is even, I think, bigger than that, which is the the fact that, and I pointed out, like in the previous podcast too, right? Federal government can do deficit spending, state and local governments can't.
Yep.
Right. So that's it. So and at the same time, over the years, federal government delegated more and more really important public services to state and local governments, including public safety, public health. Well, and public health, come on, we're talking about a crisis coming from a virus spreading, and you're talking about public health being one of the major responsibilities of state governments and to some extent local. And, where's the revenue to match that? And I will say, I don't want to sound like even more gloomy, but let's not forget that in the background, you have, still more than 27 million people without health insurance. You have a really big trend of automation that is happening that, the people, the scientists and the engineers and the economists all saying that it will continue and it will, get more intense, which will probably have impact on the labor markets, including the local labor markets. And the demography in the rural areas is, very different from the demography in the urban areas. So I've studied aging of the population in, counties in the US. So you have a big issue with the rural aging. And of course, with the COVID-19, that is impacting people in nursing homes, retirement communities, especially badly, right? So, and you have a lot of these rural retirement communities out there in the nation. And, that's an added, concern and issue moving forward. So we have even other, and of course, climate change, which, seems to be doing a little better maybe because of the lack of activity these days, but, we have that in the background. So all these things mixed, I think the imbalance that I see, with the rural versus urban is, or with local level, government finances and economy is that in many ways, state and local areas, are seeing that their hands are tied. They're asked to do a lot, but their hands are tied. We have these big stimulus programs, economic and fiscal, but what is the exact support that is going to state and local governments from the federal level? So federal level is the place where you can do the deficit financing and deficit spending. So they are the ones that will be able to do that stimulus. But what is the support? So I see that as the major weakness that is especially going to be impacting the rural areas moving forward.
Well, I don't know, Bob, we've gone almost about an hour, haven't we? And I think we may, I know you got some more questions, but I think we might just call it here for a little bit, and we may do another one of these because we're bringing up good questions right and left. Maybe after seeing, after a month or two of opening up with phase 2 here, and also summer vacation in Wyoming, we can see how our rural economies are doing in Wyoming and Nevada. And with this, see if we're resilient or if there's anything else coming out with this. So, Bob, I turn it back to you. I want to thank Roger, you from Wyoming, and Fred and Mehmet to be part of this. It's it's interesting times, to say the least. Sorry.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you all. Any final quick thoughts before we hang up for the day? All right. Thank you very much. We'll get this online and get it out hopefully in the next few days or early next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes, a pleasure to see you guys. Yeah.